You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Penny in Florida. Shout out to my fellow Floridian. I don't know if you're native, but there aren't very many of us, so probably not. But I'm happy you're in Florida either way. And Penny's question is about the concept of gentle parenting. So this is very interesting because this has become a little bit of a buzz term as of late, and we're hearing a lot about gentle parenting. And so Penny's curious about my thoughts and if it's effective and if child-centered integrates in some way with that, or if it's the alternative to that. So I'll read you some of her email and then we'll talk through some things. So the email says, "Hi Brenna, I'm reaching out for your opinion and insight on gentle parenting. I have a 4-year-old son and I've been reading a lot on mom Facebook groups about gentle parenting. I chose this style because a lot of parents said it builds a healthy bond, ensures the child's needs are met, and increases emotional regulation in parents and kids, which is very different from how I was raised." Isn't that interesting that often we try to change our parenting from the way we were parented? However, anytime I bring up discipline ideas on the Facebook groups for my child not following rules, I receive so many comments that say only talk to him about his behavior and feelings. They say that taking away what he likes, his iPad for not picking up his toys, etc., can cause trauma and resentment towards me. This has not been effective because he just does the same thing over and over, and we end up having the same conversations. I don't want to be a harsh parent, but I feel like this method isn't working. Has gentle parenting gone too far? Where is the balance? Okay, so Penny, thank you so much for reaching out. Thanks for being vulnerable and kind of sharing your struggles. And this is a very timely topic because gentle parenting is something that, as of the last decade or so, has kind of taken a lot of parenting opinion. And, it's become something that people value and are trying to implement. So I appreciate the email. We're going to talk through the child-centered contrasts. So the gentle parenting and its principles and what it's supposed to achieve. I'm actually going to juxtapose that with the child-centered approach and how the child-centered method would be more effective and accomplish the same outcome. So we'll kind of unpack those differences together. The path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right. So Penny, you mentioned that you chose this style, number one, because it's very different from how you were raised. So let me pause there for a second. It is very common that we take one of two paths. We either parent the way we were parented because it's safe, it's familiar, it's natural, and we can just kind of do it without really thinking because we replicate what we knew as children. Or we say, I really refuse to parent the way I was parented. I hated XYZ. I hated feeling this way. I hated my experience. I hated the way I was talked to. I hated the way I was treated, whatever the scenario is. So I refuse to parent that way, and I'm choosing to parent differently. But in either scenario, we are trapped in a limited set of options. Because if we parent the way we were parented, we just duplicate what we know, and it's not necessarily effective or appropriate. If we try to come up with a different parenting style, we're left feeling very directionless because we really have no idea what to do, and we're always grasping at a straw, hoping that that's going to be the magic fix to whatever parenting issue we're dealing with. So I think it's very, very common to see both of those at play. And in your case, you're trying to actually parent differently from the way you were parented. But then that means that you're thinking, okay, I want a healthy bond. I want my child to feel that their needs are being met. I want emotional regulation for both of us. Yet, right? So these things sound good. And in theory, I think this would be, what I am hoping for with our relationship. But all of a sudden, there's big gaps here. All of a sudden, I'm trying to do this and it isn't giving me the outcomes that I really want. So therefore, it's an incomplete approach. When a parenting system does not get us to the outcomes that we want, there are holes or gaps or there's an incompleteness to it, meaning it lacks a framework, it lacks a system, it lacks appropriateness, it lacks developmental understanding, it lacks relationship, it lacks something. When we have a thorough, comprehensive system in any arena of our lives, we can talk finances, we can talk business, we can talk, really anything. You throw out any concept in our lives, friendships, marriage, whatever. If we have a thorough, comprehensive, complete system, we might have some bumps and hiccups, but we're largely achieving the outcomes that we want. And at the very least, we have a foundation upon which we build if we need to make some tweaks. If we go with a parenting approach and we feel like we're still floundering and we feel like we're still not getting the goals met and we're still not achieving the outcomes that we were looking for and we're still trying to sort a whole bunch of different things out and we're just feeling confused and frustrated, there's stuff missing. So let's start with the child-centered approach and then we'll kind of contrast it to the gentle parenting approach. So you mentioned that you want the healthy bond, you want the child needs to be met, and you want emotional regulation. Well, let's figure out how we get there. So we understand that if there is no security in a relationship, then there's no safety in the relationship, and therefore there's no trust in the relationship. The only way that those three, that's kind of a flow chart, right? So we have security, safety, and trust. They kind of all flow together. Those are predicated on appropriate limits, healthy boundaries, clear expectations. We can't achieve the things that we want if there is not safety, security, and trust in our relationship with our children. But we only establish and secure those things through boundaries, expectations, and limits. So the notion that we can't take away something, or we just have to talk about the behavior rather than actually have consequences, there's no limits in that kind of relationship. There's no clear boundaries. There's no defined expectations. And here's the really cool thing about kids. I mean, there's so many cool things about kids, but in this context, the really cool thing about kids is that they need and want limits. They don't want to have no rules. They don't do well without boundaries. They would never want a parent to not put parameters in place. Kids are wired to need limits. So to think that we just have to talk to our kid about something that they've done, no, there should be boundaries established and there should be consequences associated with those boundaries if they choose not to comply with the boundaries. Because that's the only way you get safety, security, and trust. So here's why I think the child-centered approach is more effective. Because the child-centered approach is kind. The child-centered approach is respectful. The child-centered approach is relational. Above all else, how many times have we talked about this, right? I'm a broken record, but it's on purpose. The relationship trumps everything. So in context of that, we have to have a secure relationship. We have to have a safe relationship. We have to have a trusting relationship. But that's predicated on boundaries. But here's the thing. The child-centered approach, the 4 pillars, the reflective responses, all of the things that we've talked through, that actually gives a relational focus. I can remain in control of my emotions through the child-centered approach. Be a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? I can honor my child's uniqueness and celebrate how special my child is. Focus on the donut, not the hole. I can recognize that there are times when a child is so overwhelmed, it's not the time to try to discipline them. When a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. There is kind, respectful relationship built in the child-centered way. And The gentle parenting concept is I want to make sure that, we have a positive relationship. Well, that requires boundaries and limits, and it requires safety and security. And so we have to make sure that we're providing those elements before we can expect to have the outcomes that we want. And so, Penny, to speak through your scenario. So I received comments that I should talk to him, that they say I should not take away what he likes, his iPad for not picking up his toys, for example, because he will resent me and it can cause trauma. But then he ends up doing the same thing over and over again and we have the same conversations. Of course, because there's no consequence to actions. So here's the beauty of the child-centered way. You set a limit, you give choices, and guess what? You do not have to take anything away. So I'm actually going to highlight the words that were written in the email here. They say taking away what he likes, for example, his iPad for not picking up his toys. Guess what? When you set a limit and you give choices associated with that limit. So, Danny, by 5 o'clock, your toys need to be put away because that's when we're going to have dinner. If you choose to have all your toys picked up by 5 o'clock, you choose to get to play on your iPad later tonight. If you choose not to pick up your toys by 5 o'clock, you choose not to have your iPad later tonight. There's the true essence of limit setting. That's the last episode we talked through, right? So when we set limits like that, when we give choices like that, we are not taking anything away, even if Danny chooses not to pick up his toys. Do you realize you would have chosen for him to have his iPad? Which that actually brings me to a related aside. Keep your kids off screens, please. Buy my book, Device Detox. It's on Amazon, Kindle or printed. You have no idea how damaging and harmful and dangerous screens are for kids. Please don't let your kids have iPads. Please don't let them have phones. Please don't let them play video games for hours a day. It's so bad for them. But, okay, so using this example from the email, he gets an iPad or he gets it taken away, right? Here's the thing. You would have chosen for him to have his iPad. You would have chosen for him to put his toys away, and you would have chosen for him to have his iPad. But if he chose not to put his toys away, you're not taking the iPad away. You're saying, I see you've chosen not to have your iPad tonight, but you can try again tomorrow. That is, in fact, gentle parenting. Because you're not angry, you're not upset, you're not emotional, there's no power struggle, there's no anger, there's no screaming, there's no argument, there's nothing. You just enforce the choice that Danny chose. He chose not to have his iPad at the moment he chose not to pick up his toys by 5 p.m. And guess what? He will choose not to have his iPad 1, 2, or 3 times, and then he will start choosing to pick up his toys because he will choose to have his iPad. Self-control, self-responsibility, self-regulation. And there's no more burden on you to be the mean parent. And Penny, you mentioned, I don't want to be a harsh parent. If you don't want to be a harsh parent, you should love child-centered play therapy. Because there is nothing harsh about preserving the relationship, giving the child freedom to choose, empowering the child to make choices, and being kind and respectful with the way that you interact with your kids. There's nothing harsh about the child-centered way. The child-centered way is, in fact, very gentle. It's kind, it's respectful, it's understanding, it's accommodating, it's loving, it's relational. It's all of those things. But there's a framework, there's a system. You fall back on the 4 pillars. You fall back on the reflective responses. You fall back on the tenets and principles of kids not being rational. It's actually very simple, but it's grounding and it is centering. And you never have to go, oh man, what should I do in this random scenario that I'm faced with? You will always know what to do. You use one of the 4 pillars, you use one of the reflective responses, and they're all supported by the principles and tenets of the child-centered approach. So Penny, thank you so much for your question. I guess to summarize my thoughts on that, the gentle parenting movement, which is essentially, I'm tongue-in-cheek saying this, but Let your child do whatever they want and let them walk all over you and just be nice in your responses. Not only is that not effective, it creates no safety and security. It does not set the child up to succeed. It teaches them nothing about self-control. It frustrates you. It frustrates your child. It causes fractures and tension in the relationship. You both end up resenting each other. You both end up angry. You both end up unsettled. There's confusion. There's unknown. There's unpredictability. There's lack of consistency. There's nothing gentle about that. But there's all kinds of gentleness in the child-centered way because its number one priority is preserving the relationship. And that's why the child-centered model works. And that's why kids that are raised with child-centered principles are happy kids who become happy adults. Because there's an understanding of dynamic. There's an understanding that I know exactly what to expect. I know who I am in the context of this relationship. I know what my responsibilities are, and I trust that things are going to be the way that I know them to be. And there's so much freedom on both sides for that. So Penny, thank you so much for the email. I hope that all of you find that helpful. I would love to hear from you. Please reach out to me, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. You can shoot me a question. You can say hello. I do, in fact, read every single one of my emails. A lot of podcasters and bloggers, they kind of have people that do that for them. I promise you, if you email me, it comes directly to me. So I would love to hear from you, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. And I'm very grateful for the time that you share with me each week. Thank you for investing in your kids, in your families, and in yourself. That is worthwhile, meaningful work. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.